I'm giving you the first warning. I'm not going to have any interruptions from you or anybody else.
You have met with all these lawyers to talk about what is going to happen at this inquiry. None of us have been invited to that meeting, and it's time that we get...
Tuesday morning at County Hall and the start of one of the angriest public inquiries London has seen. The inquiry was about offices. The protest was about homes.
The inquiry stands adjourned now until 11:15.
What the inspector didn't know was that the inquiry would be adjourned twice more that day, finally until this morning. While the lawyers and the inspectors retreated to another part of County Hall, the protesters decided to stage their own mock inquiry. At the centre of all this passion is 14 acres known as the Coin Street site. Hard by Waterloo Station, it stands on that part of the South Bank which punches like a fist right into the centre of London. It's a developer's dream, run down and derelict since the war. It's just 5 minutes from the Houses of Parliament and 15 from the city. The plan under discussion now is for a wall of offices 1/3 of a mile long, cutting right through the community. 20,000 people used to live here. Now only 4,000 remain. Back-to-back coronation streets with outside lavatories hang on grimly in the shadow of brutal architecture on a totally different scale. Street markets and workmen's cafes thrive, while purpose-built shopping centres lie empty.
If you want them today, I'll take a £1 note for the two today, the large floor, Alex. How many do you want, sir?
The Rose and Crown symbolises the area, marooned in a parking lot facing a tower block. It's an oasis of the old London in a desert of asphalt and concrete.
I've got some old friends, and I've got old 2 bolts, sixpences.
And I'll tell you what I've got, a bit of mutton. More or less, son.
Now, after more than 20 years, the governor is selling up.
You've lost the people, the houses have come down, and you've lost
and
your
nothing's been replaced, you know what I mean? Although the property's been, they've gone, it's not been replaced, no one's built on it for people to live in. Or you've got these characters coming along, all these property developers want to earn plenty of money.
Is this part of the reason you're retiring?
People who want to live in homes, no way.
After the war and the bombing came the bulldozers, as sections of Waterloo were pulled down to make way for the Festival of Britain in 1951. The locals were promised new housing after the festival. Instead, over the years, they got the Shell Office Centre, the South Bank Arts Complex, and the massive King's Reach hotel and office development. Fred Miller has lived in Coin Street since before the festival was thought of. He's seen the plans and the promises come and go.
We're not asking them to give us anything. We're just simply asking them to replace something that they took away. Even on the other side of Waterloo Bridge there, where all the houses were pulled down for the Festival of Britain, we were promised that they would be replaced as housing.
Now the whole South Bank, from Vauxhall Bridge to Surrey Docks, is poised on the edge of the biggest single office explosion since the war. Schemes for well over 8 million square feet of office space on 16 major sites are in the pipeline. That's the equivalent of 33 centre points, or one building of that size every 200 yards for 4 miles. But Coin Street is a prime site, and the developers have employed one of the most respected architects in Europe to make their scheme acceptable. He's the designer of the Pompidou Centre in Paris, Richard Rogers.
Here you have 250,000 people arriving every day, arriving and leaving. There isn't even a cafe where you can see the river, yet the Waterloo station is very close. So what we're saying is, why not get start to link from Waterloo station pedestrian movement to the bull ring, with the road going all the way around it, but with a sunken hollow, on to the pavilion here, gateway, to the beginning of the glazed street, which then curves gently away towards the river, picks up the Jubilee Walk here, an island or pontoons on the river, and a thin 12-foot wide pedestrian bridge, which links with a pedestrian, with a big walkway on the north bank, and then beyond that with a temple. So you start to get a glazed street. Nothing new, because I mean, Paxton 100 years ago suggested a 10-mile-long glazed street, and many glazed streets, and we have a few still left. And of course, the classic one is the Galleria Milan, but you have them in the States and all over the place.
There may be glazed streets and shopping malls, but the plan is still about offices, 1 million square feet of them. The developers are Greycoat Commercial, a holding company of the property arms of construction giant McAlpines, and Vestis, the container, cold store and meat firm. Greycoats are already involved in major office development at Cutler's Gardens in the city, and here at Tolmers Square in the Euston Road. Just 2 years ago, there was another planning inquiry into Coin Street. Then, as now, the issue was offices. Then, as now, McAlpines and Vestis were involved. But at the time, they were rivals, and both their schemes were thrown out. Now, the firm have joined forces, and between them, they control just over half the site. The rest is owned by the ratepayers of London, through the GLC. Today, because of an unprecedented deal between the developers and the GLC, Greycoat Commercial is within an ace of acquiring the whole site.
This is a political thing. What the present administration and the GLC are doing...
At a policy committee meeting in March, the Conservative majority on the GLC pushed through a plan to sell their land to the developers at a price that won't be decided until the result of the planning inquiry is known.
It's very vital because our support is needed by you.
The protest outside the county hall was nothing compared to the rage inside the chamber.
And give your respect and support for us, please.
Chairman, at the last committee, which was in February, we took a decision in principle, and that is now a decision of this committee, that we wanted to go ahead and try and reach an agreement with a certain set of people for the disposal of the property in question. The disposal as such is not now in question, Chairman. It's the terms of disposal that rightly ought to be the concern of this committee. Now, when I say as quickly as possible, let me be quite clear. This is not a matter, whatever the minority party may wish to say, of doing something before or after an election. It's a matter that we have said that we want to get the site developed and in use as quickly as we can. And this has been the earliest point at which this item could be brought to the committee in an acceptable form. I believe it is now in an acceptable form. I commend the agreement to the committee because I think it does safeguard us.
Chairman, I cannot recall a speech containing so much hypocrisy and a more deliberate attempt to deceive the public than the one we have just heard. We have heard from Mr. Greengross that he is outraged that the site has lain empty for 40 years. The reason that site is currently empty is that the present majority party, when they won control of the council, scrapped the proposals for a decent community housing development on that site.
That's right.
If the Tory party had not followed that policy, then those houses will be under construction and nearing completion now, and that part of London will be coming back to life again. Instead, we have seen 4 years in which the Tory party has resisted every piece of advice from the community, has ignored any responsibility it has to the people that have lived in that area, have seen virtually nothing but office development year after year after year. And now, 8 weeks before the election, one of the most squalid property deals since the St Catherine's Dock farce 8 years ago is brought before this committee, brought in a manner which is illegal, and in a manner which has total contempt for the people of London. Now, I find it amazing that any party facing an election has the gall to flog off on these incredibly advantageous terms to a property company. It is quite obvious that members here who vote to dispose of this are more corrupt than any other people I've seen in public life.
The GLC permanent officers were worried about the deal as well. In a secret report, they warned that if the council sold the land, they would lose control over the development. Instead, they suggested a leasehold arrangement would protect the ratepayers' interests best. The Conservatives remain determined to sell. But if the officers are unhappy with the scheme, why has their advice been ignored?
When I say they're not happy, I think they have been absolutely right and proper in drawing attention of members of the council, when they're going to make the decision, to all the pros and all the cons. You see, you were making the point before that when you take a decision, you ought to know everything that's going on. There should be consultations so as you know the views of people. There should be all the other data and information. It would be wrong for me to lead my colleagues into a decision which was unreasonable. It would be wrong for me to lead my colleagues into a decision which was illegal.
But the deal would be illegal if there was proof that it was arranged purely to beat the election. And that's exactly what the Labour Party and the opponents of the scheme are claiming has happened.
The nature of the sale is to make as much progress as we possibly can to see this site brought into beneficial use. This has been the object of the exercise, and if I can speed it up, be it by just weeks or months, by in fact saying to a developer, right, you can go on now to the next stage, you can start getting detailed works done, you can start getting detailed plans, you can start financing it and funding it. If I can speed things up even by that amount, I think that I've made a contribution, a positive contribution, to bringing back that site into a beneficial use for Londoners as a whole.
But Councillor Greengrass, are you seriously telling me that the election on May the 7th had absolutely no part in your plans to sell the land in the way that you did?
What I'm seriously saying to you is that for 4 years we have been committed to trying to bring that land back into beneficial use.
I accept that, and your term is running out now.
We have come to a point now when we can actually do something about it, not just talk about it.
The election date may not have swayed Alan Greengrass, but it was certainly uppermost in the minds of the developers when they agreed to the deal. Why else would they be prepared to buy land before they knew what they could build on it, or how much it would cost them? Peter Thornton of Greycoats.
Well, if we, obviously the political nature of the situation, we thought that the site has been derelict for 40 years, and that we wanted to see something happening and something happening as quickly as possible.
So in short, if you'd waited till after the planning inquiry, you might have had to deal with different political masters who wouldn't agree with the scheme.
That could be.
The locals have produced their own scheme for the area, with low-rise housing, light industry and open spaces. But it won't even be considered at the inquiry. They feel the community is being ignored. An accident of geography, the way the river bends at Waterloo, makes Coin Street an important metropolitan site. Despite the meetings and the marches, should the objections of 4,000 people really be allowed to stand in the way of nearly 7 million Londoners? Ian Tuckett.
It's quite wrong to think that there's a conflict between the local interest and the interest of London as a whole. What we've got here is a very important site, but so is Hyde Park, and you wouldn't dream of building an office block in the middle of Hyde Park, because we know that as a city you need to have open spaces. And in the same way, we know that in a city you must allow people to live as well as putting places for them to work. Now what's happened in London is that more and more offices have been moved into the centre of London. They're now about twice as concentrated as they are in, say, a city like Paris. And that squeezed out other uses, particularly housing and industry. And what that has meant is that there are not enough people living in London to actually service the office block.
Colin Crawley is a postman. As his family grew, he had to leave Waterloo to find a house, but he still works there.
My grandparents were born around Waterloo, my parents, obviously, and my wife's grandparents was also born around Waterloo. So it's, what, 3 families. I do shift work. My early one is 6:20 start. So I've got to get up about 5 o'clock just to get to work by 6:20. You've only got 2 buses, and if you miss the first one, you know, I will be in late for work because you've got another half-hour wait till the next one comes along.
His wife Betty works near Waterloo as well, but it's the daily contact with her mother that she misses most.
I think it's so totally wrong when you think you've got to move out to give your kids a chance, because that is the only chance we could give our kids for a house.
We've always lived around here. See, I was born there and all my family lived there, and naturally we've all kind of clung together, so we still stick to Waterloo. So I think that's the answer to it, that as soon as you go away you want to come back again.
Ernie Hearn has fought for 20 years to keep the village spirit alive in Waterloo. That village may be shrinking, but Ernie is proud of the fact that it's far from dead. He runs a local community centre.
And we're showing now what can be done with empty buildings. We go raising money, and it's proof. The proof is in the pudding. And we've only got 2 workers in the centre. They're employed by us, the management. We started roller skating now 6 weeks ago. 3 weeks after we started, there was an adult session and a kids session. 160 kids were members of that roller skating. We've had to close the books. Now we're looking to start new sessions up. We've just literally got 40, 50 kids now waiting to join, which we can't cope with.
During the 60s, the skyline of London changed radically as whole communities were decanted from neighbourhood streets and filed away in lonely tower blocks. Public anger at the results of mega-planning led to a section of the 1971 Planning Act which stated that local people had to be consulted about what was to happen in their area. Once a district plan was adopted, it could only be changed by going through the whole consultation process again. One of the first exercises in this new democracy was the Waterloo District Plan. Coin Street was reserved for housing. The plan was approved by the locals, Lambeth Council, the GLC, and the then Secretary of State. By holding an inquiry into the Greycoat scheme, which cuts right across the plan, without also considering the Waterloo Action Scheme, which fits in with it, the current Secretary of State has trampled on the spirit, if not the letter of the law.
You've got to remember that the people who took part in those participation processes and took an interest in the last inquiry, as they should do, according to all this scheme, when they see this going on and again, and the whole system being treated like this, it's not too surprising if they get a bit cynical and participation ends.
Do you think you have any chance of winning?
Well, if it was a purely planning inquiry, if planning principles and local plans and all this system were to be given the weight that they really should be, yes, obviously. But if it's going to be played this way, and local participation and the whole scheme introduced by the 71 Act is just going to be shuffled around like this for election dates, not so easy to tell, is it?
So your guess is that you'll lose?
But if they go on like this, yes.
Lambeth Council are furious. They believe that their rights as a planning authority and the rights of their electors have been usurped. Councillor Duparc of the Planning Committee.
Well, I think the 1971 Act very much encouraged local authorities to consult with people. We have done that. In fact, we've gone very painfully through a process where even where we were already pretty well aware of the community's views about what was wanted in Waterloo, we went very strictly, followed the letter of the law as laid down in the 1971 Act about the process of consultation. And we arrived at a decision which was unanimously acceptable. I mean, so unanimously acceptable that it wasn't even necessary to hold a public inquiry on the Waterloo District Plan itself. And this can now simply be turned over. We think we were within the spirit of the Act, and we don't think Mr. Heseltine is.
When can you be ready, do you think? When can you have approval?
The only reply I can give is
2 years ago, the local action groups raised £10,000 to fight the last inquiry, and the office schemes were thrown out. Then the developers were divided. Today, they're united under one banner, and the protest groups have just £200 in the kitty. Also, some of the most important witnesses are still tied up in other office inquiries in the area.
Cannot physically get, finished with the Hayeswolf inquiry and the House of Lords inquiry until, mid-May.
Despite major development plans for the South Bank, leading property firms are privately predicting a downturn in office demand in the 80s. Could the developers have got it wrong? Well, they have done once before, in Brussels in the early 70s, when there was an office boom in that city. Chris Walls, property investment analyst, plotted the disaster even while it happened. He just doesn't believe that many of the South Bank schemes will be built.
Far too much office space was built, there was very little demand, and there was a huge oversupply, which got a number of property companies into severe difficulties, and several of those offices remained vacant for many, many years after they'd been put up. I think one of the problems is that a property developer is in business to develop property, and if he's not developing property, then he's not doing his job. So there was this kind of impulse to go out and develop, even when it's absurd. And Brussels is a beautiful example of how we all knew that it was wrong, but it still happened.
So, on a smaller scale, would you see the South Bank as being a repeat of the Brussels experience?
I think it's difficult to be so categoric. It's probably too early to say, but I think it is fair to say that if we are talking, and it's a big if we're talking about, let us say, 8 or so million square feet net of new office space going up south of the river, it's very, very difficult to see where the demand is going to come from to take all that up.
So will the developers make the same mistake again? Richard Cawes is the senior partner of Debenham, Tewsome and Chinook, Greycoat's own property advisors. Does he believe that all the South Bank schemes will be built?
It's impossible to say at this stage. There is demand. In spite of recession, there is demand for a proportion of that, an immediate demand. One thing which I think I should say here and now is that none of that will be built, in my view, unless there is a very good prospect of it being let fairly early in its life.
But surely the result of that is going to be blight. Sites which have office planning permission but will not be developed because there aren't the takers.
I entirely agree that there will be sites which will be reserved for offices, where offices may not be built for a while. That doesn't mean to say that we have got to look at those sites as most horrible blighted sites. They can be used for car parking, and in fact are used for car parking now in a good number of cases.
This car park by Southwark Bridge is owned by John Langs. 7 years ago, they were granted an office development permit on the grounds that they had a client for the development they proposed. The client withdrew. Today, the site is still a car park, and John Langs have no immediate plans to build. But land becomes valuable just by acquiring planning permission. For example, an acre of prime land on the South Bank with permission for housing is worth £275,000. Given industrial permission, the value rises to £300,000. But the price of the land soars to over £2 million if you hit the jackpot with office permission. But Coin Street could be different. It is a prime site, and the 1 million square feet of offices would be encased in an imaginative scheme by a brilliant architect. Greycoats themselves are adamant that the scheme is profitable, and they intend to build it all. So, when the GLC asked them for it, why wouldn't they give an undertaking to that effect? Peter Thornton again, from Greycoats.
Well, nobody can guarantee with a site of this size that one is going to complete the development within any specific period of time. It's a vast scheme. We're talking about £150 million of that order. Nobody would be able to fund and develop that scheme speculatively. There is no question of that. We, at the moment, have been dealing with a potential client for some time. There is negotiations are at an advanced stage. We see no problem with progressing the scheme with that particular client.
Now, is that a client for the entire scheme?
It's not not for the entire scheme, but it's early days, and to have a client for a substantial proportion of the site at this stage, bearing in mind that we haven't got planning permission for the site, is quite extraordinary.
Okay, politicians are cynical about it, the local community is cynical about it, you seem to be cynical about it. I simply put the question, why on earth should a firm of hard-nosed commercial developers spend all the time and money using Rogers to develop a whole scheme which you can't take to bits, you can't build that bit without the other bit? Why should they do that if that is their hidden intention? It seems a very uncommercial approach to me. Why does everybody think of them as just bogeymen who are going to build a nasty office block and run away?
Because in the late 60s and early 70s, that's what happened rather a lot.
Of course it happened in the late 60s and early 70s. Now, I'm suggesting that there is a move afoot to change that, thank God.
These offices wouldn't be being proposed, nor would Hayes Wharf, nor would ones further up the river at Effra, were it not for the fact that you, and a lot of other people like me and you, put money into pension funds, our money. It goes from the pension fund to where? Increasingly into office blocks, because on a purely speculative basis, given swings and roundabouts and booms and so on, someone in some institution where you've put your pension money gambles, there is a fairly safe home, investment home. That's what's running the planning system, really. It's not anything else. And it's your money, just the same as the money would be if we put up houses. It'd be your money coming a slightly different route, probably through taxes you pay to the Treasury.
Tuesday's riot granted the protesters a breathing space and the right to argue why the whole inquiry should be adjourned until after the elections. The inspector's decision will come on Tuesday.